I have an offer for you, Mason. One that could change everything.
Yes.
The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's pediatric ward hummed a constant, low dirge that Mason could feel in his teeth. He sat in the same vinyl chair he'd occupied for 3 months, watching the rise and fall of his daughter. Lily's chest beneath the thin hospital blanket. Each breath was a victory. Each beep of the monitor, a temporary reassurance in a war they were losing. At 7 years old, Lily was a wisp of a thing. Her vibrant red hair, the same as her mother's, now dull against the stark white pillow, her freckles standing out like distant constellations on pale skin. Fanconianemia. The words were a death sentence etched on every doctor's face. The only cure was a bone marrow transplant, a procedure as financially out of reach as a trip to the moon. Mason's calloused hands, stained with industrial cleaner and perpetual grime from his night janitorial shifts, gripped hers gently, afraid she might break. He was 35 but felt a century older. Every hope, every dream funneled into the single, desperate prayer that his little girl would see 8. His wife Clara had left years ago, unable to bear the weight of their mounting struggles, leaving Mason with a void filled only by work and worry. His world was a tight orbit of a dingy apartment, the back corridors of office skyscrapers he cleaned, and this sterile room that smelled of antiseptic and despair. He had no family, no savings, no options, just love, and love wasn't a currency the hospital accepted. That night, his supervisor, a man named Carl, with perpetual coffee breath, found him emptying trash bins on the 50th floor of the Sterling Tower, the gleaming spire that dominated the Dallas skyline. Mason, office wants you. Top floor. The penthouse, now! Carl's voice was unnervingly solemn. The penthouse wasn't part of Mason's cleaning route. It was a legend, the private domain of the building's owner, Avalon Sterling. The name was synonymous with power, innovation, and ruthless efficiency. She was Texas's youngest, most formidable billionaire, a tech and energy titan whose face was on every magazine, but whose private life was a vault. Mason's stomach clenched. Being summoned could only mean one thing: he was being fired. A fresh wave of terror washed over him. This job, miserable as it was, kept the lights on and Lily's basic care going. He rode the private elevator upwards, his reflection in the brass doors showing a man hollowed out by exhaustion, his janitor's uniform hanging loosely on his frame. The doors opened not into an office, but into a cavernous living space that seemed to float above the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying panorama of glittering urban sprawl. The decor was minimalist, achingly modern, and cold, all sharp angles, polished concrete, and art that looked like mathematical equations. It felt less like a home and more like a command center. And at its center, standing silhouetted against the city lights, was Avalon Sterling. She turned and Mason felt a jolt. She was younger than he expected, maybe in her early 40s, with a severe, elegant beauty. Her blonde hair was pulled into a flawless chignon, her eyes a piercing, calculating blue that missed nothing. She wore a tailored trouser suit that probably cost more than his annual salary. She didn't offer a smile. Mason Cole. Her voice was cool, precise, like a scalpel. I've reviewed your file. And your daughter's. Mason's throat went dry. Ma'am, if this is about my work, I promise It's not about your work, she interrupted, gesturing to a stark white sofa. He remained standing, too anxious to sit. I know about Lily's condition. Fanconianemia. Stage 3. The clock is ticking. A spark of anger cut through his fear. How do you know that? That's private. Nothing is private if one has the resources and the will to know, she stated. Matter of fact, I also know you have been denied by 17 charitable foundations. Your insurance is exhausted. The hospital is pressing for payment plans you cannot possibly meet. Each word was a hammer blow, confirming his helplessness. Why are you telling me this? He whispered, his voice ragged. Avalon walked to a sleek bar and poured herself a glass of water, not offering him anything. Because I am offering you a solution, a single unambiguous transaction. She took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving his. I will save your daughter's life. I will fund the transplant, the best specialists in the world, the full aftercare. She will not only survive, she will thrive. She will want for nothing education, security, a future. The words hung in the sterile air, too immense, too good to be real. Mason's heart slammed against his ribs. Hope, a feeling he'd forcibly starved for years, roared to life, terrifying in its intensity. What do you want?" he asked, the question tasting of ash. Avalon set her glass down with a soft, definitive click. "I require a child, a biological heir. My own genetics are unsuitable for reproduction due to a rare hereditary condition. I have no interest in the vagaries of romance or the inefficiency of traditional methods. I need a donor with specific, robust genetic markers for health and resilience, which you possess in surprising abundance despite your circumstances. You will provide the genetic material. I will carry the child. In return, your daughter receives a complete, guaranteed cure." Mason stared, the world tilting on its axis. He'd expected a demand for some illegal favor, maybe to smuggle documents or become a corporate spy. This was astronomically more personal, more invasive. You want me to father your child?" "In the most clinical sense, yes. We would utilize in vitro fertilization. You would have no parental rights, no claim, no further involvement. The child would be mine. Our interaction would begin and end with the necessary medical procedures. This is not a relationship. It is a procurement, the clinical detachment." And her voice was more shocking than the request itself. She was discussing his potential child, Lily's potential half-sibling, as if it were a corporate merger. "And if I say no?" The question was automatic, a last grasp at some semblance of control. Avalon's expression didn't flicker. "Then you leave this room. You return to your life, and your daughter dies, likely within the next 4 to 6 months. The medical reports are quite clear." She let the silence stretch, the truth of it crushing him. "I am not a monster, Mason. I am a pragmatist. I'm offering you the only viable path forward. Your morality, your feelings, your societal conditioning, they are luxuries you cannot afford. This is a simple equation. One life, with whom you have no connection, for the life of the child you love." Mason's mind fractured. Images flashed. Lily blowing out birthday candles, her smile wide and gap-toothed. Lily hooked to machines, her body failing. The ghost of his wife's accusation that he could never provide. The feeling of mop water on his hands. This woman was asking him to sell a part of himself, to create a life to be taken as payment. It felt biblical, monstrous. But the alternative, he saw Lily's small coffin, a thought so vile it made him physically stagger. He leaned against the cold concrete wall, the city's lights blurring into streaks. "Why me?" he choked out. "You could find anyone. A sperm bank, a million other men. I told you, specific genetics. A clean bill of health despite environmental hardships, indicating exceptional physical resilience. No significant familial diseases. A certain, predictable psychological profile. You are not prone to recklessness or litigation. You are, fundamentally, a man who does what he must for his family. That makes you reliable. And disposable. Disposable." The word hung in the air. It was the truth of his life, spelled out in crystal. Clarity by the most powerful person he'd ever met. He was a janitor, a ghost in the night. Who would miss him? Who would care? But Lily, the world would miss her light. It would be a darker, colder place without her. He thought of her laugh like tiny bells. He thought of the hollow silence her absence would leave. The battle inside him was short, brutal, and utterly one-sided. His morality screamed in protest, but it was a whisper against the hurricane of his love for his daughter. He looked up, meeting Avalon Sterling's impassive gaze. His own eyes were filled with a torment she would never understand, a shame that would likely haunt him forever. But when he spoke, his voice, though quiet, was clear. "You swear? You swear on everything you have that she will be cured? That she'll have everything she needs?" Avalon gave a single sharp nod. "You have my word. The contracts will be ironclad. The funds will be placed in an irrevocable trust for her care before we proceed. You will be able to verify everything." Mason took a deep, shuddering breath, the last breath of the man he was before this moment. He closed his eyes, seeing Lily's face. Then, yes, the word felt like signing his own soul away. I agree. A faint, almost imperceptible flicker of something triumph. Relief passed behind Avalon's blue eyes. "Wise," she said. She picked up a tablet from the table. "My lawyers will draw up the agreement. You will be taken for preliminary medical screenings tomorrow. The process will begin immediately. You may return to your daughter tonight. You will tell her she is going to be all right." She turned back to the window, dismissing him. The audience was over. Mason stood there for a moment, numb, adrift in the surreal enormity of what he had just done. He had traded an unknown child for his known, beloved child. He had made a deal with a woman who saw human lives as variables in an equation. He walked back to the elevator, the pristine luxury of the penthouse already feeling like a gilded cage. As the doors closed, sealing him away from Avalon Sterling, the weight of his choice descended fully. He had saved Lily, he had secured her future. But as he descended back to the ground, back to the grim reality of the hospital, a cold dread took root in his gut. This was too clean, too calculated. What kind of woman buys a child so coldly? And what secrets could demand such a heartless bargain? He had looked into Avalon Sterling's eyes and seen no warmth, only calculation. What was he truly signing up for? For Lily, he told himself, stepping out into the night. For Lily, he would walk into any hell. And as he hailed a bus back to St. Jude's, a chilling certainty settled over him. Hell was exactly where this bargain was going to lead. The sterile, lemony scent of the hospital was suddenly a lifeline, a grounding anchor in the whirling chaos of Mason's new reality. He pushed through the doors to Lily's ward, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The sight of her, small and sleeping under the blue glow of the monitors, sent a fresh, painful wave of love and guilt crashing through him. He had just bargained away a piece of his soul for her. He knelt by her bed, his calloused hand enveloping her tiny one. "Lilybug," he whispered, the childhood nickname thick on his tongue. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of a summer sky, dulled by fatigue but still so alert, so her. "Daddy, you're back early." "Yes, sweetheart. I have news. The best news." He forced a smile, one that felt like it might crack his face. "We found a way to make you all better." Her brow furrowed slightly. "A new medicine? Even better. A special doctor, the best in the whole world, is going to fix you up. No more being stuck in here. You're going to go to a new school, have a big backyard to play in. Everything." He was painting the picture Avalon had promised, his voice trembling with the effort to sound convincing. Lily studied his face with a wisdom that always unnerved him, a wisdom born of pain no child should know. "You're crying, Daddy?" He hadn't even felt the tears. He wiped them hastily. Happy tears, Bug. Just happy tears. The next 48 hours were a surreal blur of legal and medical machinery set into motion with terrifying efficiency. True to her word, Avalon's people descended. A team of severe, black-suited lawyers arrived at Mason's apartment with a contract thicker than a phone book. The language was impenetrable, but the core was stark. In exchange for the irrevocable transfer of all paternal rights and responsibilities for any offspring resulting from the provided genetic material, Avalon Sterling would establish a fully funded, legally binding trust for Lily Elizabeth Cole, covering all medical, educational, and living expenses in perpetuity. He signed every page they pointed to, his signature a shaky scrawl that felt like signing away his own humanity. Then came the doctors. He was whisked away from his janitorial duties, which, he was informed, he no longer needed to perform, to a pristine, private clinic that smelled of money and anonymity. They drew vial after vial of blood, performed scans and tests with quiet, impersonal efficiency. He was a specimen, a donor, a collection of desirable genetic code. The only moment of raw human interaction came from a younger nurse who, while preparing him for a sample collection, met his eyes with a fleeting look of profound pity before her. Professional mask slipped back into place. It chilled him more than Avalon's coldness. Meanwhile, miracles began to bloom. For Lily, she was moved to a massive, sun-filled private suite at the top of the hospital with views of a city park. Specialists with international reputations, whose names Mason had only seen in desperate online searches, appeared at her bedside, speaking in hushed, confident tones. The trust was activated. The mountain of debt that had loomed over them began to evaporate like morning mist. Lily's color improved almost immediately, a flush of hope acting as the first true medicine. She laughed more. The sound was a balm and a torture to Mason. He spent every waking hour with her, reading her favorite stories, watching cartoons, soaking in every second, all while the secret of his bargain lay heavy in his gut, a cancerous stone of shame. He told her a benign story about a generous benefactor who wanted to help, a fairy godmother of sorts. Lily, in her innocent wisdom, seemed to accept it, though she sometimes looked at him with a quiet, searching gaze that made him want to confess everything. The day of the first crucial medical procedure arrived. It was not the fertilization itself that would happen in a lab, but the retrieval. Mason was led into a cold, brightly lit room at the clinic. As he lay there, exposed and vulnerable, a wave of crushing isolation washed over him. He was alone. There was no partner holding his hand, no shared dream of a future child. This was a transaction. The clinical hum of the machinery was the sound of his compliance. He closed his eyes and saw Lily's smile. It was the only thing that made it bearable. A week later, he was summoned back to the penthouse. The environment was unchanged, but the air felt different, charged with a new kind of tension. Avalon Sterling stood by the window, her posture rigid. She turned, and Mason was struck by a subtle change. There was a pallor beneath her impeccable makeup, a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Was it stress? Disgust at the entire process? The procedure was successful, she stated without preamble, her voice flat. Implantation is scheduled. You have upheld your part. The trust for your daughter is now fully executed and immutable. Our primary business is concluded, Mason stood awkwardly in the center of the vast room. Is that all? He felt like a tool that had been used and was now being set aside. For now, Avalon said, her gaze drifting back to the cityscape. You will be required to be available for any further contributions should the first attempt prove unsuccessful. You will also be required to sign additional waivers post-birth, permanently severing the legal connection. You will be notified. The finality in her tone was absolute. He was being dismissed, not just from the room, but from the entire narrative of the life he had helped create. He should have felt relief. The deal was done. Lily was safe. But as he turned to leave, a question, born of a father's inherent curiosity and a gnawing unease, escaped his lips. Will I ever know? About the child? Avalon's head snapped toward him, her blue eyes like ice chips. That is not your concern. The child will be a Sterling. It will want for nothing. It will have a legacy. That is the entirety of the agreement. Your connection ends at the clinic door. Her words were a slap. He nodded silently, chastised, and made for the elevator. But as he waited for the doors to open, he heard a sound, a sharp, pained intake of breath, quickly stifled. He glanced back. Avalon had one hand pressed against the glass, the other splayed low on her abdomen. Her shoulders were hunched, not in weakness, but as if against a sudden violent pain. For a split second, the invincible billionaire facade cracked, revealing something raw and frightening underneath. Then she straightened, sensing his gaze. The mask slammed back down, harder than before, her eyes flashing with a warning so venomous he immediately looked away. The elevator arrived, and he stepped in. The image seared into his mind, not a ruthless titan, but a woman in silent, agonizing distress. The mystery deepened, twisting into something darker. This wasn't just a wealthy woman seeking an heir. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Back at the hospital, drowning in his confusion, Mason did the one thing he had promised himself he wouldn't do. He began to dig. With Lily napping peacefully, he used the tablet he'd bought her for games and, with trembling fingers, started searching the depths of the internet for anything on Avalon. Sterling beyond the polished Forbes, articles and TED Talk videos. He combed through obscure forums, old society gossip columns, medical patent filings linked to her biotech ventures. The official story was one of brilliant, solitary ascent. Orphaned young, raised by a stern, academic uncle, built an empire from a garage startup. No lasting romantic partnerships, no scandals. A ghost in the machine of her own creation. But then, in the dusty digital archives of a defunct Austin newspaper, he found a fragment, a small clipped society notice from 25 years ago. It reported a tragic accident at the Sterling family ranch, a fire. Casualties, Mr. and Mrs. Alistair Sterling, Avalon's parents. Their only daughter, Avalon, then 16, was hospitalized with severe unspecified injuries. She survived. The ranch was sold. The uncle took guardianship. The article was a dead end, but it was a crack in the facade. A fire, injuries. Mason's mind, now primed for suspicion, raced. What kind of injuries? And then a more terrifying connection formed in his mind, a link to the private clinic, to the specific genetic markers she'd wanted from him: health, resilience, bone marrow. His blood ran cold. Fanconi anemia was a DNA repair disorder. It often presented with congenital skeletal issues, a predisposition to cancers, and bone marrow failure. The pieces, jagged and horrifying, began to clatter together. Avalon needed a biological heir, but her own genetics were unsuitable. She had suffered severe injuries in a fire. She carried a hereditary condition. She sought a donor with exceptional genetic health, with robust bone marrow. Not just for a child, but perhaps as a source. Was he just a donor, or was he, and by extension, the child he fathered, a potential harvest? Was this about legacy, or was it about something far more visceral, more desperate? Was the child he'd agreed to create not just an heir, but a spare part, a perfectly matched donor for its own mother? The thought was so monstrous, so gothic in its horror, that he physically recoiled, nearly dropping the tablet. He looked over at Lily, sleeping peacefully because of his bargain, and a new, more profound terror seized him. He had not just sold away an anonymous child's future. He might have consigned it to a life as a commodity, a medical vessel. And if Avalon was capable of that, what guarantees did Lily truly have? The ironclad trust felt like tissue paper. His agreement felt like a pact with the devil, whose true face he was, only now, beginning to glimpse. The weight of his decision, which he had borne for Lily's sake, now threatened to crush him entirely. He had walked into the bargain thinking the cost was his own morality. He now feared the real cost would be borne by an innocent, unborn life, a life he was responsible for bringing into a gilded cage of unimaginable purpose. He had to know more. He had to find out the truth, whatever it was, for Lily's safety, and for the unknown child who was half him. The passive, desperate janitor was gone. In his place was a father with 2 children to protect, one he held in his arms, and one he might never be allowed to see. The game had changed. Mason was no longer just a participant in Avalon Sterling's deal. He was now a threat to its secrets. The sterile calm of Lily's new hospital room became a prison of spiraling dread. Every smile she gave, every giggle that echoed in the sun-drenched space, was now underscored by a terrifying question: what had he truly bought it with? Avalon Sterling's pained flinch, the ancient news clipping about the fire, the chilling synergy of his own robust genetics and her unspecified hereditary condition. It coalesced into a horrifying theory. This wasn't about legacy. It was about survival. His child, his biological child, was being engineered not as an heir, but as a cure, a perfectly matched donor for a mother with a failing body. The IVF, the secrecy, the absolute severance of his rights. It wasn't corporate efficiency. It was containment. He was the source of raw material for a medical salvage operation. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at his throat. He had to act, but how? He was a janitor against a billion-dollar fortress. His first move was feeble, driven by paternal instinct. He called the number for Avalon's lawyer, a man named Graves, whose voice was like rustling legal parchment. The agreement, Mason began, trying to sound firm. I want a clause. about the child's well-being, guarantees against medical exploitation. The silence on the line was profound. "Mr. Cole," Graves finally said, each word dipped in frost, "you have no standing. The child, once born, is solely the legal progeny of Miss Sterling. Your concerns are irrelevant and, frankly, a violation of the non-disparagement clauses you signed. Any further contact of this nature will be considered harassment, and the trust for your daughter will be reviewed for instability on your part." The threat was clear. He was muzzled. Lily's safety was the leash. He spent days in a state of paralyzed anxiety, watching Lily bloom with health while his soul withered. Then a break born of habit. On a Thursday, needing to feel normal, he took Lily for a wheelchair stroll through the hospital's lower-level atrium. Pushing her past the administrative wing, he saw him, Dr. Evan Aris, the lead specialist on Lily's new team, a man with kind eyes and a weary posture. He was also, Mason remembered from a frantic late-night search, a leading researcher in Fanconi anemia and related genomic therapies. And he was on the board of a Sterling-funded biotech institute. The connection was a live wire. Mason acted on impulse. He settled Lily with a kindly volunteer at the gift shop. "Daddy has to ask the doctor something important, Bug. 2 minutes." He intercepted Aris just as the man was entering a private elevator, his ID badge swaying. "Dr. Aris? A moment, please." The doctor turned, recognition and a flicker of pity in his gaze. "Mr. Cole, Lily is doing wonderfully." "This isn't about Lily," Mason hissed, stepping close, keeping his voice low but fervent. "This is about Avalon Sterling and the child. I know about the condition, the genetic markers you screened me for. This isn't just for an heir, is it? The child is a match, a treatment." Aris's face went ashen. The kindly demeanor vanished, replaced by stark fear. He glanced around the empty corridor. "You need to stop talking," he whispered urgently, his voice strained. "For your daughter's sake, for your own, you need to walk away. You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Tell me," Mason begged, desperation cracking his voice. "What is she planning for my child?" The doctor's eyes held a universe of regret. He leaned in, the words barely audible. "The condition is degenerative. It affects connective tissue, organ resilience. The pregnancy itself is high risk, a tremendous strain. But her offspring with curated genetics could provide not just marrow but cellular material for regenerative procedures. It's theoretical bleeding edge, and highly unethical if the donor is..." He didn't finish. The elevator dinged. Aris pulled back, his professional mask hastily reassembled, but the terror in his eyes was Mason's confirmation. "Forget this conversation, Mr. Cole. Love your daughter, live your life, and pray you never learn more." The doors slid shut, leaving Mason alone in the echoing hall, the doctor's unspoken words hanging in the air. If the donor is created for that purpose, his worst fears were true. He had not just fathered a child, he had helped design a product, a biological insurance policy for a dying woman. The contract wasn't just a severance, it was a receipt. And Avalon Sterling wasn't just a ruthless CEO, she was a desperate dying architect of her own cure, with the resources to bend morality itself. Mason stumbled back to Lily, his hands trembling. The fight was no longer just about protecting an abstract future child. It was a race against a hidden clock, the clock of Avalon's deteriorating health. And he had no weapons, no allies, and a daughter whose life was the hostage, ensuring his compliance. He was trapped in the gilded cage of his own making, watching the shadow of the trapdoor beneath his feet grow larger every day. The truth was a poison ivy, wrapping around Mason's heart and tightening. With every beat, Dr. Aris's terrified confirmation had crystallized the nightmare. Avalon Sterling wasn't building a legacy. She was farming a cure. The unborn child was not a son or daughter, but a future repository of matched biological material. Every paternal instinct he had, instincts he'd thought bartered away, roared back to life. He had 2 children now, one sleeping peacefully in a sunlit room, saved by this devil's deal, and one growing in the womb of a desperate woman, condemned before its first breath. The balance was impossible. Exposing Avalon risked Lily's trust, her cure, everything. But silence meant sacrificing his other child to a life of being a medical commodity. For days he was paralyzed, a ghost haunting Lily's recovery, smiling through a mask of pure agony. Then Lily herself gave him the key. She was drawing a vibrant picture of their old apartment, her in the center and two stick figures holding her hands. "That's you, Daddy," she said, pointing. "And that's the kind lady who helped us. And this," she added, drawing a small, blurry shape near the lady, "is the secret baby the doctors told her about in my dream. It's sad. It needs a friend." Mason froze, a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning shooting down his spine. Coincidence? A child's imagination? Or something more? A connection born of the unseen genetic thread now tying his daughters together. It was a sign. He could not be passive. He couldn't storm Sterling's tower with lawyers or threats. He was a janitor. His power was in seeing what others overlooked, in the quiet, unnoticed spaces. He remembered the layout of the penthouse, the private elevator, the secure server room 2, floors below it that he'd cleaned for years, the digital nerve center of Sterling. Enterprises. It had biometric locks, but he knew the ventilation access from a long-ago repair job. It was a desperate, stupid plan, likely to fail and land him in prison, severing him from Lily forever. But it was the only plan he had. He waited for the night of a major corporate gala Avalon was hosting, when security's focus would be on the glittering event. Using old access codes not yet purged, he slipped into the Sterling Tower's maintenance levels. He moved through the concrete arteries of the building, a shadow in his dark clothes, his heart a jackhammer. The crawl through the narrow ventilation shaft above the server room was claustrophobic, dust filling his lungs. He dropped down into the low blue glow of the humming servers, a cathedral of information. He didn't know what he was looking for, just a truth he could wield. He accessed a terminal using a password he'd once seen a tech carelessly verbalize. He searched internal medical files, his fingers clumsy on the keyboard. And he found it, not just plans but scans. Avalon Sterling's medical records. The fire injuries had caused catastrophic internal scarring and triggered a latent, aggressive form of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a connective tissue disorder. Her organs were failing one by one. The projections were grim. The file on Project Legacy was there too. It was not a parenting plan. It was a clinical roadmap. Fetal tissue harvesting for experimental mesenchymal stem cell therapies. Pre-approval for postnatal marrow extraction. The cold, logistical language, detailing the uses for Subject Alpha. His child was more horrifying than any scream. He downloaded it all onto an encrypted drive, his hands shaking. Just as he finished, an alarm blared, a silent one, on a security panel he'd missed. He scrambled back into the vent as the door hissed open. He wasn't fast enough. A beam of light caught his retreating leg. He was compromised. The next 24 hours were a blur of terror. He hid the drive, terrified to look at it. He expected police, thugs, lawyers. Instead, the summons came quietly. A different car, a different, secluded Sterling property, a glass-walled house on a lonely stretch of lake. Avalon was there, paler than ever, her fierce elegance now brittle. She looked at him not with fury but with a weary, resigned contempt. The janitor in the server room. I should have anticipated sentimentality. Mason stood his ground, Lily's face giving him courage. I know everything. Project Legacy. I have the files. It ends now. Avalon laughed, a dry, hollow sound. And you'll go to the press? They'll bury you. I'll sue for theft, harassment. Lily's trust will vanish in the litigation. You'll both be destitute. And she will still die because her treatment is ongoing. You lose everything. It was the same leverage, but it was cracking. Mason saw the desperation in her eyes, the fear beneath the threat. He played his only card. I'm not going to the press, he said, his voice surprisingly steady. I'm going to your uncle, the one who raised you, the only family you have left, the one who, according to the old filings, was investigated but never charged for negligence. In the fire that killed your parents. I wonder what he'd do to keep those old rumors buried. I wonder what he'd pay. or what pressure he'd apply for these new, worse ones to go away. Avalon's face went utterly bloodless. The uncle was her one vulnerable spot, the source of her fortune and her torment. It was a bluff. Mason had no way to contact the reclusive man, but her reaction confirmed. It was a potent one. A silent battle raged in her eyes. The will of a billion-dollar titan against the raw, desperate love of a father. The titan faltered. Her shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in an exhaustion that seemed to come from her very bones. "What do you want?" she whispered, the words costing her dearly. "A new deal," Mason said. "Lily's trust remains untouched forever. And the child, my child, you carry it to term. You give it life. And then you sign over full, legal, and physical custody to a third party, a closed adoption arranged by me. You get the stem cells from the birth, the cord blood, whatever the doctors can ethically use from that. That's your cure, but you never see the child. You never know its name. You never use it again. It gets a life, a real one, away from all of this. Or I burn your world down, starting with your uncle." The room was silent but for the wind off the lake. Avalon stared out at the dark water, at the reflection of her own gilded cage. She was a woman who calculated odds for a living. She saw in Mason's eyes that he would truly destroy it all, even if it destroyed him too. The cost of fighting him now outweighed the uncertain future yield of the child. She needed the cord blood, the initial biological material, to begin her treatments. It might be enough. The adoption will be handled by my lawyers with the NGO I fund. You will have no contact either, she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. That was always the agreement. I'll know they're safe, Mason countered. That's enough. A curt nod. Done. The new contracts were drafted with the same chilling efficiency as the first. Mason signed, his signature now a weapon, not a surrender. Months passed. Lily was discharged, thriving. They moved to a small, bright house in a quiet town, paid for by the Untouched Trust. Mason found work as a groundskeeper, his hands in earth, not grime. He heard through a terse, anonymous email when the child was born, a boy. The adoption was executed instantly, seamlessly, through a reputable agency. The child vanished into a new, protected life. Avalon Sterling received her treatments and retreated from public view, her company now run by a board. Mason never knew his son's name or face, but sometimes when he tucked Lily into bed, her red hair fanned on the pillow, she would smile and say, "The secret baby isn't sad anymore, Daddy," and he would believe her. He had lost a piece of his soul, and he had gained a world of peace. He had walked through hell and emerged, scarred but whole, with his daughter's hand firmly in his. The kindness was in choosing to protect both lives he'd helped create, even one he'd never meet. The true story was that love, in its rawest, most desperate form, could be a force more powerful than any fortune. And friends, if this story of a father's impossible choice and hard-won peace touched your heart, please show some love to our channel. Do not forget to like this video. Share this story of kindness and resilience with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Kindness True Stories for more powerful tales where love fights the darkest odds and finds a way. Your support helps us bring more light and hope. Thank you, and may your own stories always find a happy ending.